Hello and welcome to a new video. As I said in the last video about the engine rebuild, and this is why we are sitting here and not in the car actually, is that I wanted to make a cost breakdown of the rebuild, because I said it was going to be a low budget rebuild, and I think we achieved that. If you're going to see the price we actually paid, and we were well under 1,000 euros including tools. And the materials, I'm going to conclude now how much they were. To recap all of this, we basically changed everything that has to do with maintenance, kind of. So a new oil pump, new bearings, new piston rings, new valve stem seals. We checked all the valves, we checked all the bores for straightness, etc. And yeah, I decided to go for a new set of pistons. So that's going to be a bit more expensive than if you, for example, wouldn't do that, because in most cases, if you're just doing a normal rebuild, you wouldn't really necessarily use a new set of pistons. So that's something that my build has, but yours does not necessarily. That's pretty much it. But it could also be the case that you need, for example, the valve seats recut, or you need new valve guides inserted. That can, of course, add up to your cost. And I didn't even get my head resurfaced because I used a normal gasket, so I did not really need that. If I would use an MLS gasket, it's highly recommended to get the head resurfaced. Starting off with the bottom end, I had to get some piston rings, and I had to get two sets. I used Hastings piston rings because those were the most available for me and at a decent price. I could have gone for other ones, but those were like 4 times as expensive, and I didn't want to go for that. I had to buy 2 different sets because the piston ring size on the 20 valve is a bit different, and so I needed to get 2 different sizes and mix and match those sets together so that they match. But it actually worked out in the end. So I paid 22 for one set and 39 euros for the other set. So that was pretty cheap. Obviously, I could have saved about 30 euros here if I only had to buy one set. For example, if I had a 16 valve, I could have gone for one set. Then we have the head gasket. It's a bit of a weird order, but doesn't really matter. Head gasket, I used a 16 valve head gasket because that also works. There were only really minor differences in the water passages. And because I used a 16 valve transverse engine head gasket, so where the engine is mounted like this and not like this, I could use that, and it's running fine so far. So I saved about 100 euros there, because an OEM gasket for the 20 valve specifically is about 120 bucks, or 120 euros. So I spent 27 here, so 100 euros less. I could have gone for an MLS gasket, but that would have set me back about 130 euros as well, or 140. So it doesn't make much sense there, especially because I don't really need that. The normal gasket holds boost up to like 1 bar, so just fine. I did not buy new head bolts because I think they are reusable. I don't know for sure 100% if they are, but I think they are supposed to. At least I read that in a bunch of forums, so I just reused them. Seems to hold up fine. So I did not buy those. Main bearings, so a set of main bearings in that size for the 4AG is 35 euros, so nothing's fancy. I didn't use any King or any ACL bearings because, in my opinion, on a stock engine or even a boosted application, stock bearings are fine. They're a bit of a softer material, so any particles that are in the oiling system get embedded in the bearing and therefore don't mark the crank, whereas racing bearings are a bit harder, and yeah, they are just for really high pressures, really high pressure loads on the rods or on the crank, so that's not really needed in this case. So main bearings were 35, and I had to get some rod bearings. That was actually a bit difficult because the 4AG has 2 different sizes, the early 2 4AGs with the 16 valve, and that's almost all parts I had to get for the 16 valve, because if you go for the 20 valve parts, you have to order from Japan or from I think Ireland. They have a lot of parts there, and yeah, that would have been a lot more expensive. But I found a set that were actually 44 millimeters, which I need for the 4AG20 valve. They were a bit more expensive. They were 40 euros, which is still not terrible, but you gotta consider that. Then I actually bought a new oil pump because my oil pump was quite worn. I showed that in the video as well. And that was 83 euros. So that was with the most expensive piece. That was a genuine Aisin pump. So basically the best you can get, except for like upgraded ones, but that's totally fine. Even for a normal turbo build or whatever, that's completely fine. I'd say only get an upgraded one if you are going to run like 10,000 RPM or something. Otherwise, the Aisin stock pump or stock replacement pump is going to be fine. Last thing in the bottom end was thrust washers. These were 11 euros. So nothing really spectacular. The thing that you may not need to use is a set of pistons. I have an F4EG20 valve, silver top. So that's two different variants. There is the silver top and the black top. The black top has a bit higher compression. And the only pistons available for the 4AG20 valve were the black top pistons. So the car is running now a higher compression ratio, which I don't really mind because I took some material off of the head. So it's not going to be a massive deal, because I also ported the head, but I didn't include that in my price breakdown because I did it myself. And so the pistons, the complete set was from, I forgot the manufacturer, I'll put it in on the screen right now. They are from Taiwan, so they should be pretty decent quality wise. They looked pretty good, so I'll see how they hold up, I guess. There are no piston rings included, so only the wrist pin, the clips for the wrist pin, and the pistons themselves. And that was 123 euros for a set of 4. That's it for the bottom end. Now for the head. I didn't do much in the head because everything was kind of fine. I reground the valve seats, and the play in the valve guides was okay. It wasn't great, but in the exhaust valve guides I had a bit of play, but it's still pretty reasonable, although they should be done in the next like 60 to 70,000 kilometers maybe. So I have to pull off the head again and get those changed out. But otherwise, only the valve stem seals. Those are 40 euros. For the pack, I actually used ones from the Yaris engine, from the 1NZ. They work fine, 1NZ FE. They work perfectly well. You just gotta keep in mind that you need to order 20 of them instead of 16. And actually those are the same size for intake and exhaust, so the same ones actually. That's pretty much it. As for parts I used for the engine, I'm going to include some parts for my break-in period. So I'm going to include a set of spark plugs. I'm going to use NGK PKR7E. Those are basically my go-to spark plugs, which I run in everything from the Miata, from 180s, from 4AGs. They fit in basically everything, and they are the perfect heat range if you want to go for turbo or high power naturally aspirated build. So they fit perfectly here. Those were 16 euros for a set of 4. 2 oil filters, because one for the short break-in period, like the 50-kilometer oil change I showed in the break-in video, and then one for the longer break-in for the 1000 or 500 kilometers, however I want to say it. And that was 15 euros, so for both of them. Change your oil a bit more often in the first period after the rebuild. Makes sense because there is going to be some metal in the system. Then oil, I used 10W60 Manol oil. That's pretty much the cheapest 10W60 you can get. I can get that for 20 liters for 80 euros or thereabouts. So I used 6.5 liters in that realm because the engine takes 2.9. So for 2 oil changes, it's 2.9 each, and then a bit extra for assembly and stuff. And the total would be for everything I just mentioned. So everything in this list would be 477 euros. So this is basically how much you would be paying if you were doing the same rebuild as I did. Obviously, if you didn't have the tools such as the measuring for the bores, straight edge for measuring if the cylinder head is still straight or if the block is still straight, and a honing device for honing the bores, and a installation tool for installing the valves and some grinding compound for the valves. I think you'd be going to be able to get all of that stuff for about 100–120 euros. It's not that expensive actually. You can get the honing stones or the honing device for like 20 bucks. A straight edge is also like 30 or 20 euros. And the head disassembly tool is also only like 40 euros. So it's all pretty reasonably priced, and as long as you don't have any major damage, for example in the block, like there aren't any major grooves or major scratches, as well as in the crank, you can do this in a normal workshop, and you can do it yourself actually. And I would advise doing it, because your engine is going to thank you. It's going to run with more power, it's going to run more efficiently, you are going to burn less fuel, and your engine will straight up just live longer. So that's it for this series and for this engine rebuild. I may do a video on dynoing it so that I see how much power it actually makes. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do a before dyno because the engine had some damage before, so I decided to rebuild it. So that's a thing I wanted to do but couldn't, but still that's gonna be interesting to see how that engine fares on the dyno, or if I get around to do that. That's it from me. I wish you a nice day and goodbye.